with the organization for in and around 10 years already. I haven't had previous knowledge of philosophy before I started here. I started with the course that is going to start next week. Originally, you may have picked it up already. I'm not from Ireland. I'm from Germany. However, I've been here for 18, 19 years, so I'm halfway there, half Irish, one might say. And philosophy interested me because of what it has to offer. But before I go into the details of it, I might actually start off with a question to you guys. If you hear the word philosophy, what does it mean to you? What experience you might have with it? Any brave soul?
The way of living.
A way of living. See a few nodding heads.
Love for wisdom.
Love for wisdom. That's what philosophia means. Yes, very good. So you can see. One else venturing? No, that's all right. So what philosophy is, as Angela mentioned, is the word philosophia meaning the love of wisdom, or as Eric announced, it's a way of living. So many philosophies offer guidelines or understandings or visions of life, and in a way they put us on a path. And it's good to realize that there is one, because otherwise we might be drifting around a little bit, just getting carried along. We find that the weeks and the months and the years that just pass by, and we don't even realize, and all of a sudden another one is gone, and another one. And it's also been described as like getting on the bus in Dublin and waking up in Cork and didn't realize the journey, and all of a sudden it is over. And so without a coherent philosophy, it's possible that we may drift a bit. We might today do a cooking course, and then we go for wine tasting, and do maybe a yoga class here and there, or try to find something that tickles our fancy, that interests us in the moment. However, we keep moving around and not really committing to anything. So the question then that's posed is what it really is that we want out of life. Not what we want in life, because in life we might want to have a job, want to have a house, a car, or whatever it is that we want in it. But what is it that we want to be? Who do we want to be and become? And we have difficulty answering this question, because usually the answer is exactly the list that I counted out. And we have maybe even a plan for it, where in our 20s we might build our career up and have a stable income. In our 30s, we approaching buying a house, saving up some money for that. Then we trying to find a spouse, having any number of kids, a dog, and living somewhere down the country. We're in the 40s and 50s. We spend time raising those kids, try to get them out of the house that we can enjoy our old age, and putting the feet up. And that's all well and good, and there's nothing wrong exactly with this. But the question is, what is our grand goal in living? When we're looking to build up a pension, we go to a financial planner, and he's telling us about where to invest and at what time and how much do we need to invest, and so on and so forth. When we're looking to stay healthy and fit, we go to a doctor and we get regular checkups. We might go to the gym, have a training routine that we do, or we might even hire a dietitian to tell us what food we should be eating or not. But even with all these things in place, there's still the option or the possibility that we may mislive, you might say, because the approach can be less elevated. It could be that the way we raise our kids does more harm than good, or that the way we earn our living does also harm to others. So where do we look when we want to live a good life in this sense? It's a thinly veiled plot to introduce the Stoics, because that's the talk we're going to be talking, or that's the topic we're going to be talking about, and it is their vision of life that we're going to be investigating today a little bit more together and see what they have to say about how to approach this and what answers they might provide. So founded was Stoicism 2,500 to 2,300 years ago in Cyprus, or by a man from Cyprus called Zeno, who was on his way to Athens and actually capsized. His ship capsized and he lost all his belongings to the Aegean Sea on his way to Athens, where he was following in his father's footsteps and wanting to become a merchant. However, when his ship capsized, he did not turn around, retreating back to Cyprus, but rather continued on to Athens, where he encountered the writings on a man called Socrates, which you may be familiar with. He's one of the heavy hitters of the philosophical ancient world, and quite familiar. And it was in his writings that he discovered a meaning that he couldn't discover or couldn't find in just his material pursuits. That led him to the quote saying that I made a prosperous voyage after I was shipwrecked, because he discovered that there is more to life than just amassing material possessions and these things that we strive for. In the writings, he discovered that what the Socratics described, and also the people that came before him, the nature philosophers, the ones that looked towards nature to see what kind of answers does nature hold, and how does this apply to us. He found that all things are part of one single system, which is called nature. And the individual life is good when it is in harmony with nature. That's all well and good, and it sounds great. And we live in a city, and it's maybe a little bit difficult to come by. We see a tree every now and then, but nature is not something that's very close to us by the superficial point, or from a superficial point of view. But what they are actually referring to is that there are fundamental laws of nature that nature follows, and that not only govern the universe, but they also govern ourselves. Now, what does that mean in practice, or what's an example of this? A simple one, or an obvious one, is that nature is cyclical. You can easily observe this. The tides come in and out. You see the night and day, or the seasons come to pass. So nature, in a way, keeps a rhythm, keeps cycles. And it is important for us to realize that as we are part of nature, we also underlie these cycles, and the circumstances that we face do so as well. So that means that one of his suggestions is that regularly we should think about bad things that could happen to us. Well, that's not a great suggestion, is it? We're sitting there thinking about bad stuff happening. That's not great. But the idea behind it, because things are cyclical, that when we start expecting bad things, we also realize that they are not here to last. So we can think about these, but not get too attached to it, because these are temporary. So it is not necessarily the circumstances themselves that are bad, it's the way we look at them. And Marcus Aurelius describes this, that you have power over your own mind and not outside events. And when we realize this, we find strength. And this is important to notice, because it is said that, for example, the writings of Marcus Aurelius, who was a famous Stoic, have inspired Nelson Mandela when he was imprisoned for fighting apartheid in South Africa, that a copy of the Meditations was smuggled into prison, and Nelson Mandela was inspired by this. So what the Stoics are doing is, rather than simply imagining a better world and hoping for it to come, but the Stoic deals with the world as it really is. He is realizing that not everything is hunky-dory and things go wrong and bad things can happen to us, but at the same time they're pursuing self-improvement through the practice of 4 cardinal virtues. And these are the ones that we're going to be exploring a little bit more today. And a suggestion also by Marcus Aurelius out of these meditations that he has written is that to begin each day by telling ourselves that today I shall be meeting with interference, with ingratitude, with insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness. All of them due to the offender's ignorance of what is good and evil. Again, Marcus Aurelius has shown this by example, and he's the emperor of Rome at the time, who's facing the defending of the empire. So his advice is a sound one, and these ideas still hold true, because when we tell ourselves these things in the morning or something like this, we find that when these situations meet us, which they inevitably will, we can sort of smile at them. And even the people that are trying to offend us, they wonder what's going on, and we're smiling at them and gaining power over the situation, rather the situation has the power over us. But Stoicism is more than a simple attitude, but more a way to live and a way to view life and the universe that we inhabit. Because another law of nature that the Stoics explain to us is that there's the law of cause and effect. Nothing just happens by chance. There is an event that triggered what brought things to be. And that there is a structural or a structuring presence within the universe that organizes it. As recent as the late 90s, if you're a little bit into astronomy, they found that when they analyzed the pictures from the Hubble telescope, that the galaxies that we can observe, they're not scattered randomly around the universe, but they're actually organized along filaments, they call it. So we live in the Milky Way, which is part of the local group, which has other galaxies strung along it. So the universe in and of itself is not just a random array of matter just scattered around, but is actually organized in a certain way. And the Stoics back then already had an inkling of this, although they didn't have telescopes and the knowledge that we have today. However, they understood that there is a law that organizes this, and they called it the logos. And we human beings are able to tap into this in a very simple way. And by way of a brief demonstration, I would like to show how the Stoics have viewed the world or the human being and its condition. I'm going to put a simple shape here on the board. I'm going to have to keep this simple because even though I'm being, my drawing skills haven't greatly improved. Average. So, I'm going to ask you what kind of form, what kind of shape is this? Square. Square. Show of hands, who thinks that's a square? Well, most. Now, while this looks like a square, how do you define a square? What does? Sorry, you probably didn't expect to be quizzed about geometry, but what does a square? How do you define it?
4 corners and 4 equal sides.
4 equal sides, 4 right angles.
It's different from a rectangle.
It's different from a rectangle. It also can be defined by what it is not. Yes. Any curious properties about the opposite sides? The parallel ones, so they're supposed to be parallel. And how many dimensions in the square? 2. Let's have a look at this. Now, do we have 4 right angles? Yeah, kind of, but also not really. They're all slightly off. That means the sides aren't parallel either, because if the angles are off, the sides are as well. Do we at least have a 2-dimensional figure?
Yes.
You could say that, but also not, because it's just the height of the yin. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to see it. So you're already extending into the 3rd dimension there. So what just happened? Because there's no actual square on the board, because it just, like what I put there on the board actually failed every single definition of what a square is supposed to be. If you all looked at it and thought, well, that's a square. It's not a perfect square, but it's a square nonetheless.
You describe the image on the board.
Sorry?
You describe the image on the board.
Exactly.
You described your intent, Marcus.
Sorry?
You described your intent.
Mm-hmm. But what really happened is, all that you said, you described what I put on the board, but what the Stoics believed, and they inspired themselves by Plato, is that there's something just outside of our senses. You looked at this and you saw squareness, although there's no actual square. It's a drawing of a square, and while this seems nitpicky, I'll explain why this is actually important. Because we're barraged with like a number of different things and see many square-shaped objects and so on and so forth. We all call them squares, although there are no actual squares within them. So you used your eyes, you looked at it, and you connected it to something else that is the perfect representation of a square. But we also have a sense of touch, we can smell, we can see, we can hear things. So we have senses that we can experience the world with, the sensible world. But Plato and others describe that there's something just outside of the reach of our senses that influences the world that we live in, but doesn't quite impact it directly. And they call it the world of forms or the world of ideas. And we are able to tap into this because we have a spark of that logos, that organizing structure in presence that made me draw the square that you looked at. And we all connected to the same idea of that square, although my expression is poor, but you still recognize it. Now this is all well and good for squares, Marcus, why you keep talking about squares? I'm here to listen about the Stoics. Now in the same realm where this square was, we could also ask what is more real. The square, the idea of the square, or that poor ink mark that I just made on the board that's gone now. Where's that square? It still exists now. So we can think about that. But in that same realm where that idea of the square is, we find a concept that is quite important, not only to the Stoics, but to others as well, and that is justice. And this is the first of the four fundamental qualities that the Stoics said that have a very important impact on the way we live together. Same goes for the Egyptians who called this mat. We have the idea in the Far East. Plato himself wrote his Republic based on the idea of what a just city would look like, or the idea of expression of what a just city is. And Zeno inspired himself by this, although he wrote his own version of the Republic. He wrote another book, which is also called The Republic, or is by him, which is slightly different, but the ideas are the same, the approaches are different. Now, what is justice? We usually explain it with, sitting in a court of law, there's a judge sitting there and the jury passing a sentence. But in the Stoic sense, justice is very different. It is right actions, to do the right thing at the right time with the right means. And that's all easily said and done. And it starts with the relationship with ourselves. Sometimes we're a little bit hard on ourselves, or a little bit too soft and so on, and we find it then difficult to find the right measure, to pay attention to one's own mistakes and correct them appropriately. This is a practice not easily done, but once we set our intention to do so in the morning, it is possible to bring about these changes in ourselves, to observe ourselves rather than being swept up by the plan that we've set ourselves in the morning. If we start with a different mindset, to understand and remove ourselves a little bit from the actions that we carry out, and ideally set the intention of what the ideal outcome is for what we're trying to do, it is easier to achieve. So it's not justice in the legal sense, because it's not to pass more laws and more regulations and all this kind of stuff, because good men do not need laws in order to be good men, and bad men will find ways around them anyway. So the legal sense or the legal interpretation of justice is not what applies here, but it is the way we interact with ourselves first, and then of course with the people in our immediate vicinity. So justice is a form of bond that binds together human society. And when there's a lack of justice, we can easily see, because because the world we live in, justice is not. Justice is mostly for those people who can afford the best lawyers, and is not. Although the statue of justice, if you know it, is the one with the scales and justice is blind, unfortunately that doesn't seem to be holding very true anymore. So it is seeking the best in ourselves and to bring this out into the light and to put the best of what we can give at the service of ourselves and others. That we not only improve ourselves, but the society that we live in. That means we're actively, when we're caring about ourselves, that means in turn we're actively caring about the society that we live in. Because the Stoics believe that we can live and survive on ourselves, but we only strive in a society. Only when we're interacting with others, we can actually progress. And therefore, justice is the prime virtue, it's the most important one, because it is the one that connects to everything else. Our actions can be well intended. If the idea of justice is not behind this, we might mistreat others and think this is okay because it's okay for me, I don't care about anyone else, and justice will not be served. The question then is, how do we bring justice about? And the answer that the Stoics and others gave is through education. Is to have people think in that way that helps bring about these ideas and bring them to fruition rather than just every man fighting for himself. Because the word education, coming from the Greek educere, meaning to bring out. What are we bringing out? The best in ourselves and the best in others, ideally. Now that we know that justice is the one prime virtue to inspire ourselves by, what is the next thing that we need in order or what is the next virtue that the Stoics suggest to us? After we know what we're supposed to be doing, we have a little voice in our head, which is called conscience, which tells us sometimes or most of the time, what is the right thing to do. And sometimes we listen, other times, not so much. We hear what the right idea is, but following these guidances is not so easy. And this is where the second virtue comes in that the Stoics suggests to us. And this is courage. Now we're going to ask you to define courage. Any ideas? Nothing.
Brave.
Bravery. The word for it, yeah.
Strength.
Strength.
Strength of character.
Strength of character.
Doing the right thing, even when it's the most hard thing to do.
Putting your intentions into action.
Yeah, sorry. What's that going on?
The will to do something.
Mm-hmm.
I have one. No. From my point of view, maybe positive attitude towards the unknown.
Mm-hmm. All of these things are correct, and I saw a few nodding heads when some of these examples were given. It struck a chord, although maybe there was an initial apprehension of expressing this. And it's funny when these things happen, we ask these questions and the answers that we're receiving, it's like, yes, of course, now I remember what courage is. And the Stoics describe, or Plato also, that life is like an adventure that we need to face in this way, that it seems so natural to know this. So life is like an adventure to rediscover this lost knowledge that we already have. But it's not an adventure in the form of adrenaline junkies who just try to intensely feel whatever the next activity is that they're going to be engaging in, but it is an adventure of moral and in a way spiritual pursuits. To rediscover these qualities that we have them in ourselves, but we sometimes forget about them. And what you said is the positivity of it is the world that we're faced with. It's sometimes an act of courage is already a positive outlook, because that's not so easy sometimes. It knocks us over, and when I ask again the question, who do we want to be positive about this, is an act of courage already, because we could say that, yeah, I just would like to be maybe less anxious or less lazy or less procrastinating or less of negative things. But to put a positive thing on it, I would like you to think about what kind of qualities do you think you have already?
Resilience.
You don't need necessarily to answer me, it's really to yourself where you're answering these questions. And then also the question is, what do we lack maybe? Because when I asked the question of what the shape was on the board, not everyone answered. Now I could say, well, you're cowards, but that's not an ideal solution. It's not a great way to answer this question. It's passing a judgment, and that's not fair. But if I were to say that you lack courage, it's the same answer, but what that does, it puts the power back in your hand, saying, okay, I lack courage, but I can get it. I can tap into the concept of courage, because I've done it before. I've engaged in something that I found difficult, and I can do it again. Maybe in that very instant, at that very moment, courage kind of left you, but that doesn't mean you don't have it. You can re-engage with it and find more. And how much courage is there? As much as we need, because you can't go into a shop and buy a kilogram of courage. You can't buy these values, so they can also not be taken away from you, because they're not external to you. They're inside you, and you can find them. So courage, I don't remember who said it, is to accept life and the challenges that we face. It is to accept and engage in this, although we don't exactly know what the outcome is. You already did this because you're all here. You didn't know what I was going to talk about, yet you showed up anyway, and you listen to what I'm saying. So courage is the ability to work with the events of life and learn from them. Of course, we're going to get knocked over every now and then. Sometimes life is just going to beat us down, and that's what it is. But it's the ability to get back up and to re-engage with it. Because at this moment in time, we may not have had the right tools in our toolbox, but we can develop them afterwards. We can see, okay, this time I was lacking courage, or I was lacking generosity, or I was lacking discipline, or whatever it is, leaving things to the last minutes, or maybe rhythm, something to think about. But it is the human being's intention, or maybe destiny is a hard word, to be tested. That's what it is. And the societies that we live in are more protective of us. They're protecting us from all sorts of things so that life cannot come and knock us over. Yet, it comes anyway, and we're not prepared for it. So the idea is not to only rely on the qualities that we have, but also develop the ones that are difficult to us. And that is easier done in a society rather than just on our own, because sometimes when we look at Stoicism, it is these 3 steps, or these 5 steps, or these 10 steps, follow these and you'll be grand. But it is more than that, because as I said, we survive on our own, but we strive in a collectivity. Why is that? Because some challenges that I might face, you find them very easy to deal with, and the other way around. Some things that I just do without thinking about it, you're like, how did he do this? So we can learn from one another by finding the qualities and the strength in others that we may want to develop. And here's another little practice for you in order to distance ourselves a little bit from these outside events is, if you have a person, ideally in your immediate vicinity that you're dealing with regularly, maybe at work or sometimes in our circle of friends or family, that just gets your blood boiling. just make you nervous and angry. But think of them and see what kind of quality are they putting on display that you maybe inspire yourself, can inspire yourself by. That shifts a point of perspective on that individual, and shifts your point of perspective as well, and gives power back to you. It's Marcus Aurelius who wrote in his book that from each encounter he's extracting an applicable value or virtue. It is this philosophical spirit we find best to see regardless of the bad things that definitely are happening. The next one then, now that we know that we need to act justly and ideally with courage, it's important that we don't go into extremes. So the next one is moderation. Oh, Jesus. Don't want to hear anything about this, because it's easily now we're all clear about what our intentions are, and to put our heart into these actions, that we go overboard a little bit and become reckless. And then we go into the other extreme and like, well, I bumped my head into this now. So we become overprotective again. So the idea of moderation is nothing in excess. And that's easily said than done. It's easy to talk about moderation. It's much more difficult to moderate. When we think about moderation, it's on all these qualities really. It's never, or to practice them, we don't have to wait for the big event to arise. The everyday practices that we can engage in that help us with this. There is the simple one as, if you're like myself, I'm still working from home most of the time, so getting up on time, struggling with that every now and then. Yes, I see again a few nodding heads. But even the simple act of practicing something that seems unimportant, seems small, in hindsight helps us when the big challenges arrive. We already know, because we've practiced before, discipline and order and rhythm and all these kind of things that will help us when the big challenges arrive that we don't have any control over. So that not at that moment in time we start scrambling and see what are we supposed to be doing, because we've already practiced before. But it's not only moderation in our actions alone, but also in our ideas and our emotions, especially. In the societies that we live in currently, which feeds on our emotions, the mobile phones and the advertising campaigns and all the kind of stuff. And the ideas of that everything has to be felt intensely, and if we don't, it's not worth doing. But what are our emotions actually for? I mean, we have them. Animals have them, and so on and so forth. So they must be there for something. Nature, as the Stoics explain, they don't just give us things for the sake of it. There's a reason why we have them. And the purpose of the emotions is to relate to others and the world around us. The issue arises is that because the emotions are fleeting almost, they arrive very quickly and then they're intense and they go away, and it gets tiring after a while. The false interpretation then arises that the Stoics are emotionless or cold, which is nothing could be further from the truth, because they are engaged in life, and it is not to suppress our emotions and just be stoic about it, but to master them so that we can name and work with them, so that we can extract ourselves, that we're not dragged around by them all the time, which gets very tiring. So one of the key ideas of Stoicism is then not to cling on excessively to things that are outside of our control. We attach our emotions to things that we can't control them. Our jobs, they leave, our partners might find reasons to go. With COVID, we saw that many things that we took for granted just went away, and it had a devastating effect on people's lives. So the idea, and that is the reason why I believe Stoicism has risen over the last number of years, because these crises, they just kept coming. There was one after the next, and we therefore look for solutions for this. And Stoicism offers this in very practical terms. When I talked about moderation, it's also that sometimes we overdo activities. So we just engaged in so many things that we keep ourselves occupied all the time and distracted. But moderation is also to do less, but better. Because we do a lot of things and we're very engaged and we're dragged all over the place, but we do things 3-4 times because our presence and our concentration is not in what we're doing, but rather in just carrying out the action for the sake of it, rather than thinking about why it is what I'm doing. And Seneca, one of the other Stoics, famous Stoics, wrote that we let ourselves be carried away by insignificant and perishable things. And because of that, it is quite true that the time we really live is quite short. So the Stoics suggest that practicing these values and these virtues is what elevates us above these emotional impulses. And it's important to notice because this is what makes us human. If I draw a square on the board and I bring a dog in here and show him the square, he's not going to be thinking, oh, there's a concept of square. We talk about justice, they literally cannot do it. While I put this there on the board and we immediately did it, it seems insignificant, but it's really what makes us human and what separates us. So this idea of practicing these virtues and these qualities in moderation is quite important to understand. And this is what the practice of Stoicism can really give us. I mentioned throughout the talk a few practices that we can do. Another one would be to set an intention in the morning, to understand that we're going to be challenged in whichever way throughout the day, but also at the end of the day to take stock, you might say, and see how did I actually do throughout the day, because otherwise we forget things. We keep repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again, because life has a way of showing us the same mistakes that we make until we learn from them. We find ourselves in the same situation again and again and again and again. So set an intention in the morning to see what kind of quality you would like to practice today. Maybe it's one that you already think you have, or maybe that's one where you think, oh, well, it would be better if I would be a little bit more disciplined, a little bit more courageous, a little bit more whatever you think it is. And then observe yourself throughout the day. Every now and then, see how you're reacting to things. Maybe the bus was late, or the bar across the road was playing till 3 a.m. so you couldn't sleep. How to react to this? Did I manage to stay centered? Did I manage to stay focused? Or was I following my impulses? And at the end of the day, sit down and be honest with yourself. Not judgmental, but that's an important point, but honest. See for what it is, like the Stoic suggests, and not to color everything with our emotions, but to understand, okay, so today this happened, and my reaction was, I got annoyed, I got frustrated, I got angry. And then, over time, based on these experiences, ideally, we learn from our mistakes, although sometimes human beings are slow to learn, we keep repeating the same things. And with time, our aim of who we want to become and who we want to be improves. I say aim because an archer would be a great example or a great symbolic message for this. Or we ground ourselves in the here and now, finding the strength that we need by drawing from our experiences to aim at who we want to become and who we want to be. Which quality do I want to express? But at some point we have to let go and just carry out whatever it is that we set our intention for. And sometimes we hit the target, sometimes we miss, and then make adjustments and like, well, that didn't work, so I'll try something else today. So that over time we become less and less dependent on things that we just cannot control. The Stoics describe this final stage as eudaimonia. It's a happiness that comes from inside, from the reason that we know what we're supposed to be doing, what's the just action. We put our heart into these actions. Don't go too extreme, and practice these on a daily basis. So that the circumstances that arise inevitably do not affect us so much anymore. Because the actions that we carried out, we did this to the best of our abilities. We may or may not succeed, but we've been able to express the best of what we are and what we can be at that moment. The Olympic Games are coming up, and if you're looking at their website, I didn't write the quote down exactly, but let me see if I can recall it, is that the importance is not to win, but to have fought well. It's not important to overcome your opponent, but to engage in the best way possible. And this is what the Stoics deem happiness, so that we become more autonomous and a more independent being. Not independent in the state of just sitting there by ourselves, but to be able to live from that moment better with others. And this is what they term eudaimonia means, that they describe this idea of a happiness that is emerging from the inside, that is not dependent